Hi, I'm Jason Bobe. I'm delighted to be here. I'm associate professor at the Icahn Institute here at Mount Sinai in New York City. And I've also had the really good fortune of working on a bunch of great projects from the Personal Genome Project and Open Humans and DIY Bio. And I'm currently working on something called the Resilience Project. But I really want to do a sort of whiz-bang tour of participatory science. And while I predominantly work in health sciences, I think there are larger lessons to be learned around what's happened over the last 10 years for this endeavor. But before I get started, one of the things that really interests me in my career is participation in science. And so I would just like to see in this crowd how many people are currently actively enrolled in at least one organized health research study where you've signed a consent form. Um, Okay, so there's a couple hands. And this is really something that puzzles me. There's one in the back, also, a late hand. That's good. So we're still pretty low. And I call this the participation paradox. If you ask people what they care about, health and healthcare are near the top. And who are the trusted professionals? Scientists, medical scientists are near the top of the stack. Marketers and lawyers and business leaders are near the bottom. Politicians are at the very bottom. So if people care so much about health and healthcare, why don't people view research as a tool for solving the challenges that face their families and their communities? And I think that's a major problem in our society right now. And so maybe you can help me think about that and solve that. But also, we're starting to see a lot of people adopt research and scientific tools and practices on a really grassroots level. And I think that there's really important. This is a really important movement that needs to be nurtured. And this endeavor needs to figure out how it can relate to these individuals and these groups who are excited and passionate about how research can solve the challenges of our era. And so I just want to give you a couple examples of things that I think are really exciting that you can go look up. Um, so that's breaking news. That sounds pretty interesting, actually. Something about FBI, I'm not sure. So this is Dana Lewis, and she runs an effort called Open APS under the hashtag We Are Not Waiting. And this sort of, I just want to raise this example of the ingenuity that exists out there of people who are really passionate. And so she's actually created an open source stack of hardware and related software for her insulin pump, because the medical device companies who were working on this only made the data available to the medical doctors and not to the individual patients. And there's a lot of reasons why that's a problem for this community. And then also a local community, which I think you have heard from a few of these individuals, maybe met Ellen and Dan, who are here, and some other members, GenSpace. So this is some new faces of people who are practicing science. And there's this now a concept of community labs, and these are really all over the world. And there's are quite a few really great ones in the United States. And GenSpace is in Brooklyn. And some scientists are actually partnering with them, like Chris Mason, who was here yesterday. I'm not sure if he's here right now on the Metasub project. But basically, some of the boring stuff that the postdocs would rather not do, of like doing PCRs and amplifications, of sort of outsourcing that to community lab to be involved in projects where community members who are really excited, maybe way more excited to do a PCR than a postdoc. And I think there's a lot of really interesting opportunities there. And you can find more groups like this on this website, diybio.org/local, and maybe you can find some new collaborators and partners in the community to assist in your endeavor. And then also, of course, we've heard about the drop in the cost of genome sequencing, but I think sort of more important than the $1,000 genome is a $1,000 genome sequencer. And we're starting to see the sort of fruits of this shift to individuals starting to do their own science projects. And so here in New York City, there's actually a guy named Sebastian, and I encourage you to go find him on Facebook and follow him. He's been posting several times a day now, and he has one of these MinION sequencers, and he's found this plant that grows like a weed that you'll see it around New York that looks a little bit like a clover, oxalis, and he's been actually sequencing this genome from his New York City apartment using one of these MinIONs. And his hashtag is barefoot biology, and you can actually see his bare feet here at the bottom from his kitchen. And I think this is a really important harbinger of where things are heading in the future. So back to sort of some of the opportunities that we have here. for this endeavor. So to the extent that those of you are working with human cells and that you want to actually share the work that you're doing in the genome sequence data and all of the other omics data on these cells, I would really encourage you to find really well-consented cells and people where those cells derive from. And so I don't know if any of you have ever seen this advertisement, but this was actually the original recruitment ad for the Human Genome Project. And so you could imagine that this endeavor is going to have some sort of recruitment advertisement looking for people who are willing to donate their cells sort of in a similar way. So if you read the accompanying article, scientists were seeking somebody to contribute to this endeavor, and it says in there, it says, look, we're going to put it on the internet for everybody to see, but don't worry, nobody's going to know who you are. And so it didn't exactly anticipate some of the challenges that were coming with identity that Bansky sort of saw that was coming online around that time, and people were starting to understand, hey, there's a great interest in genealogy, and people are just really ingenious. And so around the same time as Bansky, also there was George Church, who said, hey, this is really it's time to make humans the key model organism to advance our understanding of human biology. And he said, there's a couple challenges. One is it's unclear whether or not people will volunteer to share extensive data, and if they do, will they be discriminated against? And that was really an open question in 2005 when he published this. This was pre-GINA. And then, of course, the Affordable Care Act and pre-existing conditions, and we're still swirling around those issues today. And there's a lot of unique features of the PGP, which I'm not going to go into them, but one that's really important is that it's participatory, and it's about being informed and being a learning community. And it's very different than a lot of sort of human subjects research that maybe you're familiar with. And there's also a global network and growing. And one of the things that we learned from the early days is that by designing a governance structure where that treats people, individuals as people, and where there's reciprocity, it's a really powerful force in forming relationships with people that you want to work with over a long period of time. And so this group, Mark Salitz here from NIST, and the FDA went around the world reviewing consent forms and saying, look, we want to develop genome in a bottle where we literally are going to be selling somebody's DNA as a standard reference sequence so that clinical laboratories around the world can calibrate their instruments for the benefit of mankind. And we want to sequence this DNA on every platform and put it on the web so people can calibrate their instruments, and over time have this really valuable resource. So we need to find a well-consented person and cells who want to actually have their DNA put in NIST as a reference standard and sold all over the world. And so they found the Harvard Personal Genome Project consent form was the place to be. And actually, it's sort of the opposite of what happened to Henrietta Lacks, who's also in the news with the new movie. These are people who voluntarily said, yes, I accept these risks, I think this is important, and I want to help support this effort, which is a very different circumstance from somebody who wasn't involved in those decisions and it came as a surprise. So, if you choose your own adventure, but I would encourage you to choose wisely. And so quickly, just a few other things I would just like to say. Go check out Open Humans and this idea of people being excited about science and building a longitudinal integrated research profile from those research studies who actually allow them to have access to the data and accumulate it over time. I think there might be an interesting model for some of the efforts in this consortium. And then also, finally, I just want to say that I'm looking for individuals in my most recent work in the Resilience Project for people who are really exceptional, who medical textbooks say they should be sick, but somehow they've escaped. And these might be really interesting individuals to explore and to go find, to actually recruit to use their cells for research like this. And I'll stop there and take questions. Thank you for having me. Oh, I forgot. There's one. Can I just add one thing? I ended too early. I want to encourage you that for those of you who are really excited about the possibilities of big data, is to first try to create big relationships. And for those who are really interested in why that's important, I'd be happy to tell you some recent experiences that I've had where we've had the big data but not the big relationships, and our opportunity to do real science dried up.
I wondered if you could say, you sort of alluded to it, I wondered if you could say a little bit more about the idea of consenting people when the landscape's changing. I mean, obviously there's the fact that GINA doesn't cover long-term disability or life insurance, but also
Yeah.
with the recent bill, there's this notion that wellness programs will allow people an end around GINA. And so does that trouble you? Because it's obviously less likely to make people want to consent, and the landscape shifting.
Right. So I think this is another important reason to organize your governance in a way that has big relationships, and that you can actually go back and recontact individuals. And there are more reasons than one why recontact is important. You know, a lot of human subject research sort of on purpose creates memory holes where like you are not able to recontact individual and they are a number and you get, you know, it's very transactional. It's like fill out a questionnaire and give a tube of blood and then we'll never talk to you again. And there are a lot of reasons why you might want to be able to go back to people, not just to advance the science, but also to check in about changing circumstances in the world and whether or not somebody is still interested and invested in continuing to work with you or on whatever particular project. So I think there's a lot of reasons to sort of reorganize the biomedical research enterprise towards one that really values big relationships as much as it does big data. Yeah.
But does it make you worry then that the trend will be for people towards wanting anonymized deposition and not relationship building because of these things? And actually, it's multiple steps back because people fear and they say, I'll give it as long as there's no connection back to me, because a third party might abuse that, and that third party might be the government or the state.
Well, I do think that there is a relationship between the protections that we afford people in our society and their willingness to take on risks in a research environment where by definition currently there can be no personal benefit, and so there can only be risk. While that being said, I think there is a substantial number of people who there are definitely certainly people who are more secure than other people and willing to take on more risk, and I think it's important for people to be able to assess their own circumstances and make that decision. Yes.
This is an international research effort.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot of people here from many different countries. And the kind of consent procedure that you're talking about is really about consent in the U.S., right? So in your work in other countries, with the projects that you've been involved with, how have you found the local laws or the cultural conditions different in terms of the consent process and how it works?
Yeah. So, you know, there are certainly a lot of differences around the world, and in terms of in the early stage in the Personal Genome Project, at least, which was intended to be global, we decided to approach it through partnerships with local people who would understand local customs laws and not try to do that from Boston, and understand what is appropriate and for people in their own cultures. And so it was really through a consortium and working with scientists who were from those countries that we were able to set it up, and not trying to set up a sort of universal system based in Boston. And so there are differences in the different sites, and there certainly are a lot of differences culturally. And I think it's important. I think it's a good model to actually find partners in those countries and not try to have a universal system that works everywhere, because I don't think that'll work.
I have a question. I'm not sure who is involved, but I'm wondering what the diversity looks like, socioeconomically, age, sex, everything, in who is consenting to give their data, and are people that are sick more or less likely to give their data? I don't know if that's probably a really huge question to ask, but I was wondering if you see any intrinsic biases in people that are volunteering.
Well, so let me just say that I think that as you witness in this room, people who are inherently science advocates don't participate in research. And so we have an incredible bias problem for all kinds of reasons that we should get to the bottom we should get the bottom of what those issues are and why is that the case, that people who are champions of science still don't sign up. And so why should you expect any person who's less excited about science to sort of do the same? And so let me just say that there are tremendous bias problems throughout human research, and it's a major problem, and we should work to solve those. Yeah. I mean, science is a human right, you know. Thank you.